by Ian Chappell at first slip.
Ian Chappell's grandfather, Victor Richardson, was captain of the Australian cricket team during the 1930s. Later, Vic Richardson was a commentator on the game.
Vic, I think, was a pretty aggressive bloke by nature, and I've read a lot about him since having a bit to do with him. I unfortunately didn't have as much to do with him as I would have liked. And it's amazing, a lot of the things that I read about him, as soon as I read them, I think to myself, well, that would have been my reaction in that situation. And I know that any time when I'd come home, say late on a Friday night before a club game, and if I'd had a few beers or something like that, Dad would grab me and he'd say, "You're just like your damn grandfather," which used to upset Mum a bit. But I think there was a few similarities between Vic and myself. And the other thing that he told me was, he said, never ever believe that anything you're doing in cricket is new. He said it's just like fashion. He said if you wear the suit for long enough, he said it'll come back into fashion, or if you hang on to it for long enough, it'll come back into fashion. He said cricket tactics are very similar. He said whatever you've tried has probably been tried before. It's just like the old wheel that keeps going round and round.
Excellent shot.
When World Series cricket started in 1977, it brought new crowds to the game and more money to the players. The traditional cricket crowd called it the pyjama game and criticised it for its coloured clothing and commercialism. But big cricket in Australia was born in commercialism. The first English 11 came to Australia in 1862, sponsored by Spears and Pond, a Melbourne catering business. 6 years later, Charles Lawrence, one of the members of the English 11, took 13 Aborigines from the Edenhope district in Victoria to play cricket in England. The Aboriginal team was coached by Tom Wills, whose grandfather was a convict. In 1797, Edward Wills had been convicted of stealing £3 and sentenced to be hung. His sentence was reduced to transportation to the colony of New South Wales. He came to Australia on the ship Hillsborough with 300 convicts and 6 women, including his wife Sarah. Wills was pardoned in 1803 and assigned to his wife. With her help, he became a successful merchant. They owned a store, a pub, a 40-foot sloop used in the sealskin trade, and a small farm west of Sydney. His grandson, Tom Wills, was sent to rugby school in England. Tom Wills was the leading cricketer in Australia when intercolonial cricket started in the 1850s.
On a Sunday morning, I would practice every Sunday of the summer, or any day when it was warm, really. I would practice at Lindwall's place, and that was from the time I was about 5 until 17. I'd bat probably for an hour and a half each of those Sunday mornings, and then when I wasn't batting, if there were other kids there, I'd be bowling to them. And that was on a Sunday. And then virtually every other day of the week, I was lucky in a lot of ways. We moved to a new area when I was 5 years of age, and there weren't any other kids the same age as me. So I didn't have any other kids to play cowboys and Indians with. So what I used to do, I'd come home from school and I'd just throw the ball against the wall, and I would belt the ball up against the wall, and I would play test matches. And the amazing thing is that whatever I played, whether it was cricket, football or baseball, I would always broadcast the matches. I don't know whether I sort of had something in mind for later years or not, but so, really, I suppose the best way to sum it up was that I would have been playing sport any time that the sun was up.
The first record of cricket being played in Australia is in the Sydney Gazette of January 1804. Regular club cricket was played in Sydney during the 1820s and 1830s. Cricket started in Hobart during the 1820s and in Adelaide during the 1830s. The game was first played in Perth too in the 1830s and in Brisbane in the 1840s. But the driving force of cricket in Australia were the free settlers of Melbourne. They founded the Melbourne Cricket Club in 1838, and it virtually ran Australian cricket for the next 70 years. In 1855, the Melbourne Cricket Club proposed a match against Sydney for a stake of £500. The Sydney men accepted the challenge, but they declined to play for money because they thought they'd probably get beaten. The match was played in Melbourne in March 1856. Sydney lost the toss. They were asked to bat, then refused to play. After much arguing, they were allowed to field first, which many of them did in bare feet or in socks without boots. Despite heavy betting against them, Sydney won by 3 wickets, and they won again in Sydney in 1857. But the next 3 intercolonial games were dominated by Tom Wills and won by the Melbourne team.
Greig came along a little bit later, and there were other kids of about the same age as him, so he would play with them quite a bit in the early days. And then when he sort of started to get old enough, we'd have backyard test matches, and they were very competitive. They were always played with a cricket ball, and we used to have all these protection around. Dad had a lot of fruit trees, so we had these wire things that used to protect the fruit trees, and we used to have to pull blinds down to try and protect the windows, but we used to break a lot of them. And the test matches were extremely competitive. As I say, it was always played with a cricket ball. I can never ever remember playing with a tennis ball. And if these things that we used to protect the trees and so on were the fieldsmen, we'd nominate the fieldsmen. And we used to have this old shed that was the keeper and about 3 slips. And I can remember one stage, I thought Greig edged one and it hit this old shed, caught it about 2nd slip. So I said, righto, you're out. And the idea when you got out, you had to go over to the tank stand and fill in the scorebook. And then you'd take off the batting gloves and everything as you walked out. Then you'd come back and you'd be a new batsman. And I remember saying to Greig, that was out. No, I didn't hit it. And then we get into this tremendous argument about whether it was out or wasn't out. Anyhow, he wouldn't go out. And Jean, mother, used to come out and say, well, he's younger, so let him have his way, he's still in. And then I would just follow with a stream of bouncers just trying to knock his block off because I thought he was out, he wouldn't go out. And there was never any thought that, gee, I've got a cricket ball in my hand, I might kill my younger brother. It was just a matter of there's this little so-and-so down the other end who's got to be got out. So they were pretty competitive matches.
Spears and Pond sent Mr. W.B. Mallam, the man in the black hat, to England in 1861 to procure a cricket team for a tour of the colonies. Mallam offered £150 per man plus first-class travelling expenses. 10,000 people greeted them when they came ashore in Melbourne. The first game started on New Year's Day 1862 at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. The club had built a stand 200 metres long with room for 6,000 spectators. More than 20,000 people came to the game on the first day. The match was played over 4 days against 18 Victorian players and was won by England by an innings and 95 runs. The English team played 15 matches in Victoria, Tasmania and New South Wales. Most were against 18 or 22 opponents, and only 2 were lost. When the English team arrived home, the Yorkshireman Roger Iddison was asked what he thought of the Australians. Well, he said, I don't think much of their play, but they're a wonderful lot of drinking men. Spears and Pond made a profit of £11,000 on the tour, and the English players were given a bonus of 100 sovereigns each. Charles Lawrence stayed in Australia, employed as a coach at the Albert Club in Sydney. In the country, games were played between the local sheep stations. Station cricket, it was called. William Hayman, a settler in the Edenhope district in Victoria, was so impressed by the skill of some of the local Aborigines that he organised a match for them in Melbourne. Hayman arranged for Tom Wills to coach them, and although they were beaten in Melbourne, they became the nucleus of the first Australian team to go to England. The team was managed by William Hayman, with Charles Lawrence as captain. Only 10 matches had been arranged when they arrived in England in 1868, but they were so popular that they played 47 games, 14 wins, 14 losses and 19 draws. The team was carried by Lawrence and Johnny Mullagh. Mullagh played 45 games. He took 257 wickets and made nearly 1,700 runs. Back in Australia, they played a couple of games together, but soon dispersed. 10 years later, Johnny Mullagh had his one and only game for Victoria.
My first cricket hero was Keith Miller. I'm not really sure why. I think the main thing that attracted me was the fact that he had that long black hair, and with his run-up, he used to, just flick the hair back before he'd start the run-up. And as a kid, as a bowler, I was a great mimic. I used to love to do all the different actions, and in fact, well, I haven't tried it for a long time now, but I reckon there's a few of the actions like Ray Lindwall, Keith Miller, and Frank Tyson was another one that I used to be able to do very well. So I used to copy all these actions, and I think that's how I got started with Keith Miller, and the fact that he was a flamboyant character and I think an attacking cricketer. That was something that I always liked.
The second English team had a fast bowler named George Tarrant. Tarrant they called him. An 11-year-old boy named Fred Spofforth saw them play in Sydney. Later, Spofforth said, "At once my ambition was to bowl fast like Tarrant." Australia soon produced its own heroes, and F.R. Spofforth was the first of them. Spofforth bowled express when he was young, and later he became the master of every fast bowling ploy: the bouncer, the slower ball, the packed field, the scornful air and the dark look. His bowling partner was the bank clerk Harry Boyle, a medium pacer who concentrated on line and length and could move the ball both ways, in the air and off the wicket. John Blackham, Australia's wicketkeeper from 1877 to 1894, always stood up to the stumps, even for Spofforth. Dave Gregory was captain of Australia in the first Test match, played in Melbourne in 1877. Australia won by 45 runs, and Gregory led the first representative team to England in 1878. Then the captaincy was taken over by Billy Murdoch. Tom Horan came from Ireland. When his playing days were over, he became a cricket writer. When Gregory's team went to England in 1878, the players had to put in £50 each to fund the trip. After they beat the MCC at Lord's, the success of the tour was assured. Each player received a return of £750 from his £50 investment. In 1882, in a test match against the best 11 in England, Spofforth took 7 wickets in each innings and we won by 7 runs. Australia was still a series of colonies. We had no national figures, we were conscious of our convict origins. The team came home to a huge reception. In a land short of heroes, the man who bowled England out was king. By the turn of the century, the pattern was well established. Test cricket was pretty much the same then as it is now. This was the golden age, with players whose names are still well known today. Joe Darling, Clem Hill, Warwick Armstrong, and the incomparable Victor Trumper, the golden boy of the golden age of cricket. Neville Cardus said of Victor Trumper, "No doubt God could have created a better batsman, but so far he hasn't." Until 1905, most tours had been organised by the players themselves, often with the backing of the Melbourne Cricket Club. When the Australian Cricket Board was formed in 1905, there was a series of disputes between the players and the new administrators. Frank Laver went to England as player-manager of the 1905 team and as manager again in 1909. The players wanted him as manager in 1912, but the board wouldn't have him. It got so heated that Clem Hill, who was the Australian captain, had a fist fight with one of his co-selectors at a meeting to pick the team for England. The board wouldn't back down, so 6 of Australia's best cricketers refused to tour in 1912. Hill and Trumper refused to go, so did Warwick Armstrong, and so did the fast bowler Tibby Cotter. In 1916, Cotter signed up as a stretcher bearer with the Australian Light Horse. He was killed in 1917 in a cavalry charge at Beersheba near Jerusalem. 60,000 Australians and more than 900,000 young Englishmen were killed in the war.
We played in the backyard at a place called Winslow when we were transferred there to the mountains between Bowral and Goulburn. And there I discovered that cricket was a real game, that I loved it. And I walked 7 miles there and back to go to attend the first match in which I was ever chosen. That was the Winslow Public School versus the Tallon Public School. And we walked it along the railway line. killing snakes as we went. Arthur Maley, the slow bowler, was my particular hero, whose deeds I followed very closely through the papers. He then was at the height of his capacity as a leg spinner and a bowsy bowler.
In a Sheffield Shield match against New South Wales in 1926, Victoria made 1,107 runs, Bill Ponsford 352 and Jack Ryder 295. Arthur Maley took 4 wickets for 362. After the game, Maley said he thought the crowd had been very helpful, but it was a shame Ryder had been dropped by the bloke standing just near the scoreboard in a brown overcoat.
It was from him, indirectly, that I learned that the bowsy existed, and I learned how to bowl it. The learning to bowl was done by correspondence, and that was done by the fact that my eldest brother Jack then had gone to Sydney to live, and he became a member of the North Sydney District Cricket Club, where he had the good luck to see Arthur Maley on a visit there one day, bowling his wrong-uns in the net. He watched it so very, very carefully that he was able to sit down that night and write me a letter about it. And from that letter, I reckon within a day and a half, I was bowling bowsies at our front gate post there at Winslow.
Australia won 12 of the first 15 tests played after the war, but England regained the Ashes in 1926 and held them easily in Australia when they won the first 4 tests of the 1928-29 series. Don Bradman played his first test that summer and went on to completely dominate the 1930 series in England. He made 974 runs in the tests at an average of 139. Bradman's dominance was so complete that the English captain Douglas Jardine had to devise some new tactics.
It was an experience that I will never forget. It happened here on this Sydney cricket ground on the Saturday morning of the first test of the 1932-33 series, known as the Bodyline series. And I walked out, I should say probably about 11:30, following on Larwood having just bowled Lyle Nagle first ball. I saw Nagle's bat hadn't come down from its full back thrust by the time the middle stump went hurtling. And I walked out to be met by my mate Stan McCabe, who was then 127, on way to his famous 187 not out, which was the greatest test innings I've ever seen played on this ground. And he met me halfway and he said to me, "Don't worry, Tiger, he won't bowl a bouncer at you." And I had enough intelligence to say to him, "I know he won't waste one." So I went down that bottom end down there. I took block as if I really meant to stand up and give him Larry Dooley. I had a good look at the field, which is what every batsman does who wants to look like a batsman. And then this little bloke came running in from the distance. I say little, he was about 5'8". He had a chest on him as big as the village blacksmith. And I thought as he came up, now Billy Woodfull, my boss, said to me, "Whatever you do, don't get hit." And I thought, that's pretty good, that's reassuring. But as he came up, I thought, now, my mate down the other end, I better do the right thing by him. I got in behind my bat, and I thought the ball hit the middle of it before Larwood had let it go. So I looked down at Stan, I just shook my head, and he nodded. And from that time onwards, I took a very advantageous step to the rear every time that I faced Larwood afterwards. The feeling in the dressing room when a man went out to face up in that time, when it wasn't just a bouncer like you see nowadays, it was a bouncer with intent. By that I mean that the field was placed in all the positions which made it impossible for a man to use his bat to his own advantage. So all you had to do was to get out of the way of it or duck or do what you could. And the law of averages set in each man's mind, knew that there would come a time when you didn't just quite make it. So the feeling in the dressing room as a man, Fingleton, any of the boys who went out there early on to take the new ball, Victor Richardson, Bill Woodfull, you'd almost shake hands, say goodbye and say, well, I'll put 2 bob in for the wreath when it's required.
Bradman still averaged more than 50, but England went home with the Ashes. In England in 1934, although no official action was taken, it was made clear at the highest possible level that the ill feeling of the bodyline summer was to be forgotten.
Mr. Summers is the Secretary of State for the Dominion, and he is officially in charge, especially of our most valued visitors from Australia and the other Dominions. But as Dominion Secretary, I'm strictly impartial. Body line bowling. Prime Minister tried to talk about it. Good God, the only game of cricket that he knows is marbles.
4 years ago, I had the privilege and the honor of answering to the toast in a similar function. And on that occasion, spread round the tables, there were a number of ashtrays. Inscribed upon the ashtrays, "We come for the ashes." About a fortnight after that function, the Journalists Institute, I understand, received a bill for 52 ashtrays. Ladies and gentlemen, there were only about 18 Australians in the party.
Australia won the first test. Early in the tour, the batting was carried by Woodfull and Spofforth. And by Bill Brown, who made 109 at Lord's in the second test, which we lost by an innings. Stan McCabe made 137 in the third test, which was drawn. Bradman found his form in the fourth test at Leeds, where he made 304, and he followed this with 244 in the final test at the Oval. Bill Spofforth was almost as prolific, with 181 at Leeds and 266 at the Oval. O'Reilly and Grimmett took 53 of the 65 English wickets to fall in the tests. O'Reilly, who bowled leg spin at close to medium pace, bowled 334 overs and took 28 wickets. Clary Grimmett bowled 396 overs in the tests and took 25 wickets.
He was the greatest mechanical machine I've ever seen bowling leg spinners. He gave the no-hoper no hope.
The 1934 series was level after 4 tests. Australia won back the Ashes in the final test at the Oval. Vic Richardson captained the Australian team in South Africa in 1935-36. Back in Australia in 36-37, Don Bradman took over the captaincy. Australia won the series after losing the first 2 tests when they were caught on wet wickets in Brisbane and Sydney. The famous barracker Gabba was still in full cry.
Can I go in with an umbrella? Oh, for a strong arm and a walking stick. Stand back, umpire, he's gone mad. I might state, for the benefit of those that's down from the country and from long places where it takes them a day and a night to get here, that I am the one and only. There's plenty been imitators, but they're not me. I am the one and only Gabba. For 45 years I've been classed as it and known as it. And it's a hot day, and I've been red on the bottle, and I've been chewing rock salt for half an hour. Let's go. I'll see you all on the eel.
Others took cricket commentary more seriously.
On the eve of the 1938 Test Cricket Series, I have been asked to explain to you how the synthetic ball-by-ball descriptions are broadcast by the national stations. Let us follow the course of a typical message as received in the Commission's Sydney studios only a minute after the actual happening on the test ground in England. This cable is taken down in duplicate and immediately amplified by cricket experts who fill in details regarding field placements on model cricket fields for the commentator, whom you can now see broadcasting his description from the amplified cable information. As the shot is made, the effects man, who has in front of him a copy of the cable message, drops the needle on an effects record, and listeners hear the applause of the crowd as the shot reaches the boundary. And now, let us listen in.
The farm's ball to Bradman. It's a short ball. Bradman moves back and pulls fiercely past square leg. Hutton running round from deep fine leg has no chance. The ball goes under the ropes for another 4. That's 4 more to Bradman.
Definite appeal to the United States of America to regard the war in the Pacific as a war so crucial that Australia, having regard to her circumstances and having regard also to the circumstances of Great Britain, desired that the President and the people of the United States would look at this segment of the total war in the way in which Australians were looking at it.
When the Japanese came into the war, I was still at school, and there was a fear that we would get bombed in Sydney. I was called up first of all, and then I joined the AO. I was up in New Guinea for about 3 years. Well, I used to play junior cricket in St George district, and Bill O'Reilly lived up the top of our street. I think his number was about 84 or something, and our number was 57, so it wasn't too far apart. And every day he came home from work, which was a schoolmaster, he passed our corner where we played cricket. And every time he was coming, someone would sing out, and we'd put the wickets out, and I'd start to bowl. At 14, I was recognised as a possible chance of playing for club cricket. So I went up and tried out with St George, and Bill O'Reilly was the captain of St George at the time. And he watched me in the tryouts, and he reckons he stored my memory up for the later time. And I got picked in the 3rd grade. I played 3 matches. The 2nd grade, played 3 matches. And then in the 1st grade with Bill O'Reilly's captain. I met Keith Miller in 1946 when he came back after the war with the services side. I played for New South Wales against Keith. And after that, we were picked to go to New Zealand with the Australian side. We're still friends, yes. We're wonderful friends, I should say, and that's where it first started.
Lindwall and Miller went on tour with the 1948 side in England, regarded as perhaps our greatest side ever. I asked Ray Lindwall and Ian Chappell to compare the 1948 side with the side that Chappell led in the mid-1970s.
Well, I'm a great believer that any really good player from any era would be equally as good in any other era. I don't think you can judge teams, but I don't think that. I think there are reasons why a player is a good player in his era, and that's 1, because he's got a lot of ability, but 2, he's got a bit of ticker, and 3, he works things out, and I think that would get you through any other era.
What about you, Ray?
Well, Ian didn't answer the question too well because he didn't say how they'd go against the 48 side. The 48 side was a little bit different from any other team I've ever seen, because out of the 17 players that went to England, they were all more or less champions in their own right, and they had all types of bowlers, 4 or 5 spinners, 4 or 5 fast bowlers, and also all-rounders, batsmen as well. And out of the 17, I don't think you could fault any of them. Whereas in Ian's team in 1970-odd, I think they had 8 very good players and three other good players, but not quite up to the standard of the 48 side.
You had one advantage over me. You saw them both. You see, I wasn't around in 48.
You weren't born.
That's right.
You know, I feel today, amidst all these lights and cameras and so on, somewhat like a movie star. Of course, at a very different salary. I would like, at the outset, to refer particularly to the message which has come along from His Majesty the King. That is very greatly appreciated, but I'm somewhat fearful, my Lord, that he intends also to come to the test match at Lord's in June. If you will cast your minds back some years, His Majesty was credited with having got Ponsford out there on one occasion when the English bowlers were not able to do so.
Among the greats of 48 were the wicketkeeper Don Tallon. And Sid Barnes, one of the real characters of Australian cricket. Barnes was brilliant, ambitious and provocative, the only player of his time who was prepared to stand up against the administrators. He declared himself unavailable for the tour to South Africa in 1949. He couldn't afford to go, he said, because the allowance of £450 was not enough.
Our salary was very poor. We went away in the 48 tour. We were paid £715 for a 9-month trip. So it's not much money to keep you going. In those days, we were a bit in awe of all the officials. We were treated like, not schoolboys, but every time we were selected to play a state match, we were given a talk by one of the heads of the New South Wales Cricket Association, who told us what to wear, how to behave, and what to do.
Richie Benaud's Test career began in the 1951-52 season, and Alan Davidson's first-class career was beginning at about that time, as Australian cricket started to go through one of its less successful periods.
Near the end, Hassett put himself on to bowl.
Australia lost the Ashes in England in 1953. The Australian captain, Lindsay Hassett, took the loss with his usual good grace.
We'll be waiting for you in Australia in a couple of years' time. And I hope anyway, when whoever wins out there, that the cricket will be just as enjoyable and the result just as close as this series. Thank you very much.
In Australia in 1954-55, the English fast bowler Frank Tyson dominated the series, just as Harold Larwood had done 21 years before. England was clearly the better team in the mid-1950s. We regained the Ashes in 1958-59, but by that time, the England-Australia series had become very serious, and a lot of the fun had gone out of the game. That all changed one afternoon in Brisbane in December 1960. On the first day of the Brisbane Test against the West Indies, Gary Sobers made a century in 125 minutes. The West Indies put on 359 on the first day and went on to make 453. Australia replied with 505, including 181 from Norman O'Neill. When the West Indies were all out for 284 in their second innings, it looked as if Australia would win comfortably, but we lost 6 wickets for only 92. Then Alan Davidson and Richie Benno put on 134 for the 7th wicket. Only 7 runs were needed with 4 wickets standing when Davidson was run out. Then came the most exciting over in cricket's history.
They're going to run for anything. They sprint home for a single, and it's 5 to win. Back now with Hall for the second ball. Benno snicks and he's out. Put by Alexander. The 8th Australian wicket has fallen. Mekip starts to run. Hall picks up and throws, but he misses a certain run out. Routh swings, the ball goes high in the air. Hall races across and he drops the ball. Mekip connects and the ball flies deep in the outfield. They complete a second run. The scores are level. The third run will win the match. Routh makes a great effort, but the bails go off and he's run out.
Sir Donald, do you think the tremendous success of the West Indies tour is a sign of renewed interest in cricket? Will it have any sustained influence on the type of cricket to be played in the future?
Yes, Vic, I do. I certainly hope so. I think in recent years, cricket has tended rather to get a little bit on the slow side, and I feel it's been necessary to revive the knowledge in the minds of the people that you can play bright and attractive cricket and still play it in the true test atmosphere, that a fella can hit a ball for 4 which will bounce back off the fence about 10 yards and still be a safer shot than if he hits it 20 yards. I think the whole atmosphere that has been created this season has gone right throughout the world, and it will be reflected in years to come.
The change was a long time coming. For Australia, it seemed to have arrived in the early 1970s with a pair of great fast bowlers and a young, aggressive team led by Ian Chappell.
And caught by Ian Chappell at first slip.
I consider myself to be pretty fortunate to have captained that side, because not only did they have a lot of skill, but there were 11 very determined cricketers there, and they all had the one thing in mind, that they wanted to win cricket matches. And I mean, you look at some of the characters like Dennis Lilly and Rodney Marsh and Jeff Thompson. As a spectator, you look out on the field and you can tell that they're very competitive guys. Some of the other fellas were equally as competitive. Fellas like Doug Walters and Ian Redpath, who didn't show much emotion on the field. But I can assure you that they were very, very competitive guys in their own quiet way. So that was a terrific start. I think the moulding, as far as I'm concerned, was really a matter of making sure that the team got on well together and that there was a terrific spirit in the side. That wasn't hard to do because we had some good characters, and also they were damn good blokes. And we were lucky. Most of us were drinkers, and so we'd get together socially, and that worked in very well. And I think the important thing to me was to get these guys and to tell each of them what I thought was their job in that team. Let's pick an example, Doug Walters. Now, Doug, to me, was a terrific natural stroke maker, and he was one of the few guys that I've come across who could win a test match off his own bat. And he was one of the few guys that could get you out of a bit of strife from number 6. And the reason he could do that was he was such a good natural stroke maker. And so I thought it was very important that he always played his natural game, whether we were 4 for 40 or whether we were 4 for 250. And so in the early days I went to him and I said, Doug, as far as I'm concerned, you're a natural stroke maker. That's the way I want you to play all the time. Doesn't matter if we're in trouble, I want you to play that way. And what I was trying to do there was put him in the situation where he wasn't in two minds. So if he walked to the wicket with 4 for 40 on the scoreboard and a ball came along, first ball came along to square cut it. Now, Doug was a great square cutter. I didn't want him sort of getting halfway into the shot and thinking, oh, you know, if I get out, will the captain kick me in the backside? I wanted him to just go bang and hit it for 4. And if he did that a few times, he might turn things around and get you back on top.
They were the best test team in the world, but as had happened 70 years before, off the field, the players weren't satisfied with the way they were paid and the way they were treated.
It really came to a head, the Melbourne Test in 1974-5 against the Englishmen. They had terrific crowds in that Test match, if I remember rightly, around about 250,000 for the game. We were getting $200 a Test match at that stage, and suddenly it was the first time I'd ever done it. I just suddenly wrote down 12 by 200 on a bit of paper, 2,400, and I thought, $2,400, that's what we're getting. Where's the rest of it going? And that's about the time I think we started to look at ourselves and say, you know, we're bloody idiots playing for $200 a Test match. It was a pretty touchy subject, and to give you an idea how touchy it was, one of the Sydney Test matches, I think it was the New Year Sydney Test match, Alan Barnes, who was Secretary of the Australian Cricket Board at that stage, said that there were 500,000, he came out in print actually, said that there were 500,000 people in Australia who would play for nothing. And Ian Redpath, who was a pretty placid sort of guy, I was pretty annoyed at this. It was the front page in one of the big newspapers in Sydney. So we were all pretty annoyed about this. And anyhow, I remember the next day when I got to the ground going out to practice and thinking, you know, as soon as Barnesy comes into the dressing room, I'm going to have a chip at him about this. So I was sort of sitting in the front part of the Sydney dressing room waiting for Barnesy to walk in. And I didn't take much notice of Redder, who was sitting very near the door, much closer to the door than what I was. And Barnesy, the door opened, and Barnesy walked in, and I sort of started to get up to go to have my shot at him. And the next thing I know, Redder's just got him by the scruff of the neck, and he's yelling and screaming at him. I can't even repeat what Redder was saying at him, but he was complaining about this comment, you know, about 500,000 would play for nothing. He said, don't you people realise that sure, there might be 500,000 who can play for nothing, but none of them would be much good out there in a Test match for you. The guys that are playing because they're the best in Australia, and they should be paid accordingly. And so I just sat back down. I thought, well, I don't have to say anything. Redders is getting this point across rather well. So it was a very touchy subject, and most of the guys were touchy about it. From memory, I would say that Dennis was probably more touchy than anyone else about it. And I think that probably had something to do with the fact that he had his back problems. And I got the feeling that in 74-5, when he would just come back from his back problems, that Dennis felt that every Test match might be his last one. I was in the fortunate position of being paid from work as well. So it wasn't as great a problem as with a guy like Dennis Lilly, who wasn't getting paid. And so Ian Redpath was another one who had a problem. In 1975, he couldn't go on that World Cup tour because he had an antique business at that stage, and he just couldn't afford the time away.
The result was that the world of cricket split in two.
Well, I think it basically started with Dennis Lilly. Dennis was being managed at that stage by Austin Robertson and John Cornell. And I think Dennis, as I say, he was the one who, more than anybody else, who had a bit of a bee in his bonnet about money, and I've already explained the reason why. And I think one night he was complaining about the lack of money, and also it was a bit more than lack of money. It was our lack of involvement. I mean, we were never asked about things involved with the playing of the game of cricket, and we thought we did know a little bit about that. So when Dennis complained, I think John Cornell sat down with Austin and said, well, you know, what can we do about it? And that's really where World Series cricket developed. John Cornell and Austin Robertson came to me at the gazebo here in Sydney, and we had a meeting, and they said, this is what we want to do. Are you in or you're out? And at this stage I'd retired from international cricket. I'd been out of it a season. And I said, yeah, well, I mean, I agree with the principles of it, and I think it's a good thing. So I said, yes, I'm in.
In November 1978, 50,000 people came to the first game under lights at the Sydney Cricket Ground.
It was a Friday afternoon I got the call. I was down in Melbourne getting ready to play for North Melbourne, and I remember I had a pair of jeans on and a denim jacket, and I suddenly got this phone call saying, get out to the airport, jump on a plane and get up to Sydney as quick as possible from Austin Robertson. And so I did that, got a cab into Kerry's office, and I walked in, and he shook hands with him, and he said, what are you, a so-and-so cowboy? And we got talking about cricket and, you know, what I thought about World Series cricket and the concept, and we talked about that. And then he said, OK, he said, who do you want in this bleeping team? There was that problem, and the only other problem that really arose was over the captaincy. And he said to me, righto, he said, you're captain of this lot. And I said, well, you know, just hang on before you go anywhere. I said, Greg's captain of the present Australian side. The players might not want me as captain. He said, what do you think this is, a bleeping democracy or something?
World Series cricket brought tens of thousands of new fans to the game, and it brought more money and more involvement to the players. It was probably the closest thing to a democracy that cricket in Australia had seen since the turn of the century.
Ian Chappell was my hero. Like when we used to play on the back veranda on the farm, I was always the one with the bat in the hand, and I was always Ian Chappell. And then if I got out, then I'd become Greig Chappell. And then if I got out, I'd become Doug Walters, sort of just go down the team. But I think Ian Chappell was my number one. I always tried to sort of make the big movement back like he used to, and try to copy everything he did. He used to rush home from school and run in and watch the Shield games and the Test matches on TV, and I think it's always been a goal to play for Australia. It's disappointing playing at the moment and not winning. Just that's difficult. It's sort of disappointing, but I think just wearing the green baggy cap means a lot.
Cricket had to change, but in the back streets of the big cities, in the back blocks of the bush, no doubt there are plenty of kids today whose heroes are Alan Border or Dean Jones or Geoff Marsh. Let's hope they remember Dennis Lilly and Jeff Thompson too, and they try to copy the spin bowlers who've played a big part in our recent Test victories. The green baggy cap has been looking a bit battered lately. As Geoff Marsh said, it's disappointing. History shows us that Australian cricket has been down before. We've always found new heroes in the past. As Vic Richardson said to Ian Chappell, it keeps going round and round. The heroes of the present and the past create the heroes of the future.